call Maman. She was so happy she cried. She wants you to have her wedding gown. It's white lace.
Yeah, that's good. I can't get married in your mother's dress.
You are wonderful. Thank you. I've worked hard to become so. I admit it, you are better than I am. Then why are you smiling? Because I know something you don't know. And what is that? I am not offended.
Well, sir, you were a cowardly son of a bitch. You just shot an unarmed man.
He should have harmed himself. He's gonna decorate his saloon with my friend.
And once again, Angus snatches victory from the claws of defeat.
Exactly right.
Or
Very
something
good.
like that.
Something like that.
And you are?
I'm Tom.
Oh, and I'm Mark.
And
we
are the Cinemaniacs. Well, nice to be back. Thank you for helming it for a week while I relaxed in the wonderful area of Bailey Island, Maine.
Ooh.
Lovely place up there.
I assumed you were somewhere more tropical for some reason.
No, certainly wasn't tropical. Let me tell you about the water up there, doing a little diving and everything. So
The water is painfully cold in Maine every time I've ever been.
Yes.
It's always like you put my foot in the surf and it's like a knife stabbing right into my foot. And It's like, I'll just look at the waves from a distance.
But it's a lovely area. So.
And did you watch any films, perchance, while you were
Actually,
away?
strangely enough, there's a great place up there. Not that I'm getting any kind of compensation, but Bull Moose is this. It's a retail place. They have DVDs, brand new, old Blu-rays, video games. Just a great place. It's like built for me and my kids. So we went there, bought a whole bunch of stuff. But when we went up there, our intention was, because I picked up a copy of Mel Brooks's High Anxiety.
Yes.
We were looking around for some funny stuff. Not one of my favorite ones and not a great movie. But, and I felt I should probably lose my job at the Keene State Film School for this. But realized that my kids had never seen a Hitchcock film.
Ooh.
So every night that we were there, up until the last night when we watched High Anxiety, we watched Hitchcock films.
Okay, so you did Hitchcock first.
Yeah, The Birds and Psycho and North by Northwest and Rear Window and Vertigo and all those. So it was a great time. So
I like High Anxiety.
Oh,
to
really?
me, Mel Brooks runs out of steam a bit later. Men in Tights, I think, was the first one I saw that I thought was really not good. And
well,
then
Blazing
Life
Saddles, I
Stinks
think, is probably the funniest movie ever made. Young Frankenstein, probably his most clever movie. But then I was...
Silent Movie I like, too. Nobody knows
Silent
about
movie
Silent
was clever,
Movie
that's
anymore.
true. But I thought there were only a couple of... I realized there were only really a couple of Hitchcock references in High Anxiety, and the rest of it was just kind of silly and mostly stupid stuff. But anyway, we're not talking about High Anxiety,
look,
are
we've
we?
just given them some wonderful recommendations.
That's probably true.
If they happen to go to video headquarters like we do.
We do every week, and often more than that.
Yeah,
more than
sometimes.
Once.
So we have not a huge amount of stuff to talk about
We have
today.
enough time to babble about Maine and Bull Moose and High Anxiety.
Exactly. Partially why I did the show solo last week was so that we wouldn't have one of these marathon breathless sessions of talking about everything we've seen.
I think the audience appreciates that.
Thank you. Or, you're welcome. So we have two in the theater today.
Yep.
Since you've been gone,
Yes.
as the song says, if you would care to begin.
I'd love to, and I want to thank everybody, Joe and Suzanne and everybody over at Keene Cinemas for their help. But we have a reluctant and unexpected drug moose. A moose. I'm thinking of bull moose. She's a mule, a drug mule, and a reluctant drug mule who accidentally, some of the drugs gets into her system, and suddenly she becomes really, really smart. And I'll discuss the rest of my feelings about it when we talk about what happens to Lucy.
Oops, did I give it away?
Lots of people.
Sorry. So written and directed by Luc Besson,
yep.
who, for me, first came to prominence for doing La Femme Nikita. Great female,
some terrific stuff.
Centric action movie in the early 90s. He did Fifth Element, The Messenger. Really, if you look at his body of work, it's predominantly ass-kicking females in a lead role.
Right.
So he's
and good movies.
Yeah, yeah. How did you think this one stacks up?
What happened was my big question. This one is, okay, so I'm going to see it with my kids who are both scientists and want to be scientists, and I like to, I follow that kind of stuff. So you do have to suspend disbelief in any decent novel. Stephen King will say, suspend one thing in disbelief. Believe that there are vampires, that werewolves exist, whatever, and then you move on. So we all went into it saying, okay, that's fine. These drugs get into her system, and suddenly, as her ability to use her mind, we have this Morgan Freeman, and Morgan Freeman just must accept. I'm going to send Morgan Freeman a script because I feel sure he'll accept it because he's in anything lately. And I love the guy.
It's interesting.
But wow, he has some bad choices lately, and this is another one of them. Last week, I believe you reviewed Transcendence, which I felt about the same way.
See, I'm one of the few voices in the wilderness that like Transcendence.
You like Transcendence? Well, here Morgan Freeman is this theoretical scientist physicist who's saying, oh, we only tap 10% of our brain, and wouldn't it be amazing if we could tap 20%? Well, Scarlett Johansson ends up, as a result of these drugs, being able to tap 100% of her brain. Essentially becomes omniscient, I'm-powerful, I'm everything. And after that, at the moment after there's some moments at the beginning. This thing starts off like there's 5 minutes of sort of backstory, and then bam!
Right.
It's, excuse me, I'm so choked up about it.
I know, you get very emotional.
It's action. And she has a couple of scenes where she's being threatened by these Korean drug lords. Excuse me. And she has a couple of scenes where, it's clear that they want to kill her or something like that. And she does wonderful emotive moments, and I'm thinking this movie has some real potential. The moment after the drugs infiltrate her body, she becomes just like stoic and like a
Terminator.
You're right, exactly, like that. And there are some throwaway references to as she's losing her humanity and what the potential for humanity as they get smarter. And I thought it would have been really interesting if they have some unusual editing bits toward the beginning as they're discussing how the brain works and how man has evolved. We cut away to other animals. And there's some really interesting parallels.
Like half science documentary, half
and then they
thriller.
drop that pretense, which I thought was unfortunate. I just thought throughout the entire film, as in my opinion, it just gets sillier and sillier. It was basically the Matrix in many respects.
Mm-hmm.
She can do anything, but she needs more drugs, so she has to find these drugs. Why can't she make the own drugs? So many of these questions came about. I think with art, and this isn't art, but I think the filmmakers, I felt like they were really thinking they were making art. Besson has the right to, I think I have the right to expect that from him because he's done some great stuff. I thought it would have been really interesting if, as she's getting smarter and smarter and smarter, she gradually loses her humanity and her touch with that. And then you have an opportunity to say, what's the expense of becoming more and more intelligent as a species? And they just didn't do that. They just kind of threw this out the window. I felt this was an excuse to have Johansson demonstrate, some of the mind-bending powers as she's throwing things around. It didn't really come to a point. The action sequences were interesting enough, but I just didn't. It got to the point where I was laughing at the film because it was so outlandishly silly. And I went to see this in Keene, and there was about a third full. And the moment the credits started rolling, many people got up and were just like kind of guffawing at it. So this one I really think missed the mark, certainly for me.
This is one of those things where you look at news, press releases masquerading as news, and they always tout whatever the #1 film that weekend is.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's the best movie of the weekend. It means it's the movie that most people were convinced to go see.
Right.
The second week really tells them
Watch
more of
where
a
it
tale on
drops,
how good something is.
How it sustains.
I like Luc Besson films, and most of the time now he's writing movies or producing movies. He's not directing a lot. So I was kind of excited when I realized this is Luc Besson directing something again. And I love action movies, and he's done some great ones in the past. This isn't really an action movie. It's a movie with some action sequences in it.
Okay.
But when I think back about it, it's not wall-to-wall action.
No.
She's like she's a badass and everything, but she's using superpowers as much as anything else. I did like a car chase in this film where she uses her magical powers to speed through the streets of Paris, avoiding collisions while collisions are going all around her because she, I guess, has psychic or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was interesting to see. I mean, it wasn't shot as good as I think it could have been, but it was shot better than a lot of garbage is now. So that was a little refreshing. But it's one of those movies, kind of like The Matrix, where when your hero can do anything and there's no rules, and all of a sudden they can turn, solid matter into liquid, or they can make people float, it's just like, well, who cares? There's no jeopardy here. You know this person has nothing standing in their way. So I kind of got bored with it after a while.
Right.
And it's weird to say a movie like this was dull for me, but ultimately it kind of was. It's not very long either. This is like 93 minutes,
it's like 93,
which
I think.
is also refreshing these days. And it is this weird kind of art filmy mix of, as you were saying, you have Morgan Freeman giving a lecture about how the brain works, and he's like Joey Context for this movie or something.
Yep.
Now, I would say Basil Exposition, but he's more like Joey Context because he's explaining what's going on, and they cut back and forth, and eventually his story and Johansson's story merge and continue. And it's weird because you see all this like documentary footage and science footage cutting back and forth between what's going on, and then big words on the screen. It's really weird, and I just didn't really like it. I'm not sure that people who are going, if you like Scarlett Johansson, you get that. You get her in tight clothes, you get giant close-ups of her face and all that. But it's just so, it becomes so silly, where the idea that you can use 100% of your mind power lets you control space and time that's just dumb to me. That it pushes it into a superhero movie, and it's just
Well, the Morgan Freeman bit seemed to me to be an excuse to do all of the rest of this stuff. Here's what, we don't know what could happen.
Right.
Oh, what happens if you use 40%? And he says, oh, I don't know. And so, wow, imagine if we have 100%. I kept fixating on, and I obviously fixated on this, the loss of humanity as you get smarter and smarter and smarter, what that means. And I'm trying to put all of these, as you say, these seemingly documentary aspects and real-world news aspects of other races and other species and how smart they are, and the dolphins do this, and blah, blah, blah. I kept being struck with, as she gets smarter and smarter, you're right, certainly, why does she have to drive? Her physical body can dissipate, and why doesn't she just teleport there? Well, that doesn't make any sense. You got to have action flicks. But she's driving along. She's clearly psychic, but all of these people are getting killed. All of these horrible car crashes, and all of these police officers are being killed, trying to find her or trying to stop these Koreans. And I was just stunned by kind of the wanton violence that she was allowing to have happen. I would have thought and hoped that as we got smarter and smarter, we would have cared more for life. Also,
there's a moment she needs an operation performed on her to remove the drugs. That are leaking. She walks into an emergency room in, I believe, Taiwan, and she looks at the. There's a guy on a table about to be operated on by a team of surgeons. She looks at his X-rays, walks up, and shoots the guy in the head and pushes him off the table, and then casually says to the surgeon, "There's no way you could save him anyway." And at that moment, I'm like, I don't like this person.
Right.
That's just evil.
Right.
Even if it's true what she said, that's just nasty. And I don't know that my opinion of that character ever recovered after that moment. I think it was supposed to be maybe throwaway and funny or cool, but that was nasty.
Yeah, that's an excellent point right there, and that's what I felt throughout the whole rest of the film. That all of these things that she's doing, I don't care about my main character. It is funny you mentioned that Morgan Freeman, once she contacts him and says, "Hey, I got to talk to you because I'm super smart." He says, "Well, I'll get a bunch of my amazingly brilliant scientist buddies together," and it was funny that I was kind of struck with when she finally does meet them. They're all white males. There's no other race going on. Freeman's our only black guy there. There aren't any women there. So I just thought, even to represent the greatest of all scientists, this felt like a very superficial attempt for Besson to make an action flick.
That's a lot of what Besson does too. Going into this, I had hope because I don't always like everything he has a hand in, but he has a good pop sensibility. He can come up with fun ideas.
Sure.
They don't always go anywhere, and that's kind of was the case with this. I will say that. Odd juxtaposition in ratings with these two movies we're talking about in the theater. This was PG-13, and it was very gory. There was some very suggestive stuff in there. I wouldn't take a kid to see it, although there was a lot of pretty young kids in the film. Whereas the next film we're talking about was rated R, and I think it's because they said the F word once.
Right.
But this film was like pretty sleazy for the most part too.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the box office because, boy, I don't know. This is not. I don't think this is the movie a lot of people are paying to see.
I don't think this is going to have legs, that's for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of legs that are powerful and could crush your thorax with a single grip of his mighty muscles, who you going to call when your kingdom is being beset by zombie-like evil people who want to slaughter you and drink of your precious bodily fluids? You call the one, the only Hercules. So you see in the trailer,
Yep.
Hercules fighting monsters and all this other stuff. And my pal, who I went to see this movie with, he had seen this trailer and he's like, "Ooh, cool! This is going to be a new movie about the trials of Hercules."
Right, that's what I was thinking.
They run through those trials in the
And they're
first like 60 seconds of this movie, and then it was kind of amusing. This is not a serious. No, well, this isn't entirely a serious film.
Right.
It tries to inject humor throughout. It's basically about Hercules and his band of merry men who are mercenaries who are traveling for the highest bidder to vanquish rivals for various kingdoms and groups. And this film is, we talked about this after we saw it too. This is one of this current movement in Hollywood where it's, oh, you think you know the story. Oh, no. This is a story you've never heard before. And so this is the Hercules, oh, this is the real story of Hercules. So basically, and I commend them for taking a different approach to the material. It's treating Hercules as though he was a real person.
Right.
And all of those clips you see of the dragons and everything are quickly explained as the legend that builds up around him to help basically market this guy so he can get more work. And the deal with Hercules in this movie, he is a very strong man, and he is surrounded by a group of people who are very good at something.
Right.
I'm watching this, I'm always like, there's a female Amazonian who's an archer, and I'm like, oh, she's kind of like Hawkeye. I'm like, this is kind of like, ancient Greek Avengers movie. Everybody's got their skill.
Felt very much like that.
And so basically, Hercules and his group are hired by John Hurt, who's the king of a kingdom, who's king of a kingdom, as opposed to king of a queendom, whose kingdom is being beset by bad guys, and Hercules is going to try to vanquish the rivals, and we see where it goes from there. I didn't really like this movie too much.
Right.
I went in with an open mind. I had seen, I guess I was hoping for another Scorpion King, which is a movie that I didn't see until fairly recently, and was surprised how much I enjoyed it because it didn't take it seriously. It was a lot of fun and rollicking adventure. And this isn't. This is pretty serious for the most part. There's occasional lines that, to me, pretty much always fell flat. They felt like a frat boy who thinks he's funny making a comment, and it's just like, well, yeah, you're not really a comedian. The action sequences weren't very impressive to me. They weren't shot badly like most things are now. To me, they just were missed opportunities. Like, somebody would do a cool move, but it would be happening as the camera moved past them, so it wasn't given enough time to register on camera, or they would cut away too fast, they'd be a little too close to something. So the action felt sloppy to me.
Okay.
And you see a movie like this for the action. So it didn't have the fantasy elements you thought it would have. The action wasn't so hot, the comedy wasn't so hot, and it was too long. This movie was, I think, a little over 2 hours. Having said all that, this is the movie that was rated R of the two that we saw. And after it was over, I'm like, why was this rated R? Because occasionally they had these little comments that were distractingly modern in their sensibility. Some modern use of language here and there, or a modern profanity, and it was just like, if you had not done that, this would be a pretty fine as far as appropriate for a PG-13 for kids, and it's not. So I didn't really care for, or as I was calling it, Jercules, the Jercules and loosey-goosey double fracture that I saw on Sunday. So yeah, I couldn't really recommend Hercules. I would say rent Conan the Barbarian instead. It's going to deliver what you want.
Okay, I'm pretty much kind of right along with you. I ended up, we went to see this in IMAX 3D, just because I love The Rock. I think I was looking, because his latest films have had a lot more of that just kind of intentional tongue-in-cheek humor that I was looking for. This really is much more of a, strangely enough, a slow action film, because you're right, the action that you see, and I think it was shot the way it was shot, and as you say, you miss something because they cut away so quickly. To try to make it a little bit more believable action, but it doesn't work. We don't see what we want to see. Ian McShane was one of my favorite kind of sub-characters. He's this guy who the gods had allowed to foresee his death.
He's a seer.
So he keeps saying, oh, I'm going to die this way, I'm going to die this way. And every now and then it'll come up, oh, it didn't happen, he's disappointed. I thought that was one of the funnier little subplots that worked for me. I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to recommend this on video because it should have been such a spectacle.
I think the size helps it.
I think the size helps it, right. But I don't think it's not a strong enough film for all of the reasons that you mentioned, for a lot of, and I hate to say this, plot reasons, dramatic reasons. We find out early on that Hercules, his wife and 3 kids are all horribly slaughtered, but he doesn't remember anything. So everybody thinks that Hercules did it. Well, yeah, right. Like, we're going to believe that. So, but this is a motivating plot line throughout the entire film, that he's just grief-stricken by this. And we're going to find out who really did it. We eventually find out how it really happened. And there's... we follow a couple of characters who are both helping Hercules and kind of behind-the-scenes plots. I don't want to give anything away here. And then a big twist comes, and we find out who's really behind all of this. And then in like 15 minutes, the movie ends. And I really thought it should have been much more. If we're going to try to ask Dwayne Johnson to emote and act, which I think maybe he can.
I think he can. There was that movie. He did a movie called Faster that was really good.
Right.
But he also did the one about his son is sort of railroaded for drugs, and he was good in that.
Yes, and he was good in that.
I think he can be good. I think he just tends to wind up being in movies that aren't very
so
good.
This should have been, for those of you who are going to go see it, and if you like The Rock, I think it's fun. I like him. But this should have been about who killed his family. And so he goes off on all of these missions, but eventually it's always in his mind he's going to find out. Because I never once believed, and I don't think anybody in the audience would ever believe that he did it, both because, and this is because of the casting, and he's your main character, so you can't do that. So there were a lot of those little things beyond all of the things that you mentioned, which I agree with. I was looking forward, not expecting it to be great, but not expecting it to be this mediocre. I thought it was a pretty mediocre action flick.
It was both of these, I felt it was dull, ultimately.
Yeah, pretty kind of slow and boring. I think I tend to find the humor worked a little bit better for me, but it certainly wasn't enough for me to recommend it. So, unfortunately, not a lot of the theaters I'm going to recommend.
Speaking of theaters, this is a little tangent. I think we have time. So, I have this beef with children's films that I've mentioned before in the show, where they all have to have battle sequences.
Oh, okay, right.
Like, no, you can't see a film with the kids movie where there isn't one group engaged in an epic battle with another. And now it seems like every historical film that we see has to have battle sequences. This is a Hercules movie, epic battle sequences.
Right.
The Noah movie that we're going to talk about, epic battle sequences. Yep. There's a Moses movie coming out, epic battle sequences. There's a trailer. Universal has just decided they're going to reboot all their classic monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, and all that.
Oh, right, yeah.
So there's a trailer in front of Lucy for Dracula Untold. Another thing I hate, as I've been saying, this is a story you've never heard before because we just made it up. And this Dracula, epic battle sequences.
Right. Oh, sure.
So I'm sure the Frankenstein movie, that was the I, Frankenstein, that terrible piece of garbage, epic battle sequences. Yep. So I'm getting frankly tired of epic battle sequences in movies. You know what? Hand-to-hand combat, one-on-one, can be far more exciting than somebody going Control-V in the computer so there's a million people fighting from a distance. And I agree. I think on the small screen, Hercules is going to lose something because on the big screen, there's so much that are epic battle sequences shot from a distance that it's going to be tiny on even your modestly sized screen at home.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one. If you're in any way, shape, or form intrigued, you should see it in the theater. It is on IMAX again. I didn't find you saw it on 2D. I saw it on 3D.
Yes.
I thought the 3D worked. If there were a few times where, and it's not super in your face stuff, but he's charging at something and fighting demons and all of this.
It didn't seem, from my 2D experience, that it would gain much in 3D because
it didn't really.
It was cut too fast and shot in such a way that I don't think you could really perceive the 3D if there was any very often.
Right, I'll agree.
So enough bashing of theatrical movies this week. Moving on to the fine roster of films we have for home viewing,
Quite
provided
a few of them.
to us mostly by Video Headquarters here in Keene, who we love because they're a video store that still exists in this day and age in Keene, and they kick arse, as the British would say.
They did, as a matter of fact.
If you would care to begin.
Well, it's another, as we've already talked about, we have epic battle scenes, and it's a historical drama. You'll love to find out about what's a guy to do when God comes down and talks to you and says, hey, I'm going to start raining for a little while, and you better get a bigger boat. You have to find out what you can do because your name is Noah. Now, I want to be clear that for the audience that you and I are not in this movie.
No.
So, unfortunately,
although if you could hear what we hear outside the door there, it sounds like the flood is upon us.
I rode my little scooter. I'm going to have to build a bigger boat for that one. This one, both on video, and I was surprised how well it translated to video. It looks great. You know, the Blu-ray that I was watching, it looks absolutely terrific. I like so many of the actors in this. Emma Watson is wonderful. Jennifer Connelly is very good, and I'm really liking the performances. But it's this strange mixture of, and it bobs back and forth between them. historical biblical drama and action sequences, and then
Yeah.
it doesn't manage them properly. There are moments that, and it also plays a lot. I'm not a biblical scholar, but I know my Old Testament pretty well in particular, and we find out that there's somebody who works, essentially, besides the fact that Noah's been told, you got to build a big ark to save everybody, then there's also this subplot of this king who had killed his father, and the king's going to try to battle Noah and take control of the ark and all of that. And so somebody within Noah's ranks helps him with that. And while I know that, at least to my knowledge, this subplot didn't really exist, I didn't remember that this person who was so close to Noah was essentially a bad guy, so I was fixated on that. Lots of strange little biblical references that didn't quite connect for me. But as a film, here we go. We're getting in trouble. See,
Say good things about it. Say good things about
the
it.
Lord doesn't like my getting down on Noah. I think it's worth a view. I think the performances are good enough. It's wonderful looking, and the kind of strange mixture of battle sequences. I just kind of, okay, we're in another battle sequence, fine, let it go ahead, and then get on with the story. There are a couple of scenes with Russell Crowe and Jennifer Connelly that are just wonderful. Connelly plays his wife, who. This is in many respects, and I didn't think they pushed this, but I read it as sort of almost a modern story about how a guy is so fixated on his work that he lets his family
Pretty common theme in Hollywood.
right, go on their own, and he really doesn't pay a lot of attention to them. And that's her big problem with it. So there's some nice little moments in it. It was 6 of one, half dozen of another, but ultimately I thought Noah was worth a watch.
I was a little cooler on Noah than you. For me, maybe I just didn't care for the tone of it. It was very grimy.
Yep.
Very, very dark. It wasn't a happy Noah's Ark tale. It was very grim, and everybody's sour-faced for the most part, and everybody's dirty, and I guess I want everybody wearing white clothes and tap dancing in a Noah film on the Arks, the bow of the Ark. But so it had a very dark and grim tone to it, and maybe it lost me when the giant rock monsters showed up to help build Noah's Ark and fight the battles. And I read some discussion online saying, well, he was helped by archangels or some angels, and nobody said what they looked like. So in this movie, they're giant rock monsters. But to me, it kind of lost me where they're giant rock monsters helping him. It seemed. Now, there have been other films that told this tale. I don't know that there was ever a film devoted specifically to this story, feature film. I mean, there was a film of the Bible years ago, and I think it was told in that. And it almost felt to me like it was stretching a story that was fairly thin out too much to be 2 hours plus.
I think hence the inclusion of that subplot with the king and all that.
And so I wasn't really into it when I saw it. I think this would appeal more to maybe biblical scholars just to see what this approach to the material is. Was this Christopher Nolan?
I don't believe
Darren
so. Aronofsky.
People who are a fan of that director may want to check this out just to see what he does with the material. But if you're a casual viewer, I don't know if Noah is. This I don't know. It is maybe too ridiculous a take on the material if you know the story that everybody knows. I couldn't get into it.
It's not. Weird. We've had a couple of films, and we're going to be discussing them both. We've talked about them in the past, and some coming up that are very much, for want of a better term, pro-religion. Religion and the Bible and faith is very much its point. This one I didn't get that much of a feeling. This was really kind of more of an action flick.
Right.
It ended on a strangely. Religious note, but the vast majority of it I don't think is true. If people don't want that, if they're worried about that,
I think
don't
if you're
think
somebody
you're
who is bugged by films that are overly religious or preachy, like God's Not Dead Next Week or Heaven is for Real or the Fireproof and the Kirk Cameron movies and stuff, I don't think you're going to have that problem with this. This just treats that element as that's part of the story. It's not pushing anything or it's. I don't know if I'm elucidating my point.
It's a character who's talked to God and he's fun.
Yeah, that's just how
but it's
it
not
is.
like you should listen to.
Right. This movie's easier to believe than Lucy, even with the giant rock monsters. Speaking of fanciful tales,
yes,
this one was a real surprise to me. Up next, we have Dolph Lundgren and Scott Adkins, who you may know from Expendables 2 and various other action movies, as people who are on the hunt for a giant mythical creature in another part of the world, a creature which is said to be legendary.
Ooh.
And that's how it ends.
Yes.
It's really pouring outside.
It is.
Just for context.
Just in case you want to hear.
I knew nothing about this.
Nor did I.
I know the two leads as action stars. I've seen Lundgren in a number of things, and he's been around since 85.
Oh, yeah.
And Adkins I really only know from Expendables 2, but I know he's done a lot of other stuff. So I expected this would be an action movie. And the trailer shows you, and I guess if you read the box it shows you, but I just popped the disc in, and it's these guys walking through the woods with guns or whatever, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be like mercenaries out in Vietnam or something like that.
Right.
And they walk past a tree with these giant claw marks on it, and I went, ooh, this movie is now far more interesting to me. And it's basically, it's kind of like the Indiana Jones-Belloc relationship.
Yeah, it felt very much like that. Yeah.
Where Adkins is this nice guy who's a cryptozoologist, and he goes around trying to capture or investigate strange creatures, and
then here comes Dolph.
Lundgren
Ready to
is the
kill him.
mercenary. He wants to
Yeah.
kill him. And it's those guys sort of really kind of not literally duking it out, but a battle of wills, and they go to this location where a water pipeline is being put in somewhere in China, and there's a giant, is it a gecko? It's like a giant lizard. It looks
Yeah.
like a lizard you would see, but it's very big, who's killing people, and they're trying to figure out what it is and capture them and all that. And I thought this wasn't bad. It's not great. This is no Sharknado, certainly. But it is a passable Saturday afternoon,
Sure.
half asleep on the couch movie. I will give it the credit that it is pretty well shot. Like so many movies are just badly shot, and they really throw the cinematography away. And this one, it's like, we're shooting this in China, and we're shooting this on a lake near some mountains. So we're going to make that shot wide enough so you can see the lake and the mountains and appreciate the fact that we're here. And I appreciated that fact. Almost no action in this movie in terms of fisticuffs between the two leads. They do scuffle a bit toward the end, but if you're expecting to see a movie where these guys duke it out, this is really not that. This movie really, aside from a little bit of gore at one point, this could play on TV as is. It probably could. And I almost wondered if this was originally a Sci-Fi Channel movie.
Right.
It's not cookie cutter like the Sci-Fi Channel movies are, and I like those for the most part.
Right.
There's nothing really distinctive or outstanding about this, but I just found it to be a pleasant 90 minutes, on the couch.
I think one of the things going into this, I was expecting a low-end sci-fi channel
The
kind of.
CG is pretty bad. I will say
Yeah,
that.
the CV, but I think they know it, and so they stay away from it as much as
Right.
possible. They don't have that kind of budget. I mean, look at the stars that they've got. They've got that kind of a budget available to them. But I thought Lundgren was perfectly acceptable ever since Expendables 2, which was my favorite movie of either last year or the year before. I don't know. He's got rid of his accent, and I thought the performances were all pretty good. I think what I came away with, and I get the sense that you had the same thing too, was although I didn't know much about it, I wasn't expecting much, and so I got a lot more than I was expecting.
Right.
And it was a lot more fun, and it had those elements you speak of, like with Predator, and so they stay away from showing you what you can't, the CG that we've come to expect. We're not going to get that. So I thought it was a pretty smart, and as you say, strangely enjoyable hour and a half with this thing. Not expecting much out of Dolph, and he was pretty good. There are certain, I won't even say B, I'll probably say C level movie stars, and the kind of movie you're going to get into with them, and this was not one of them. I thought it was significantly better.
It was a nice surprise.
Yeah, so Legendary was a bit of a surprise for me.
Speaking of legendary and C-list stars,
And being surprised, not that Cameron is a C-list star, but Cameron Diaz is having a wonderful relationship with this wonderful man whom is treating her well, and she's just really loving. But suddenly she finds out that he's married, and she's not real happy about that. Eventually she gets together with his wife to try to talk about it, and the two of them find out that they're being double-timed by yet another person who is the other woman. So I like Cameron Diaz. She's got wonderful comic timing. We've known this from ages and ages ago, all the way back to Something About Mary. Leslie Mann, didn't know her very well. I thought, although we open up with a couple of potty scenes and things that are, I again think those are in there for the groundlings. I thought it was kind of below this movie. But I thought the three of them, you get Kate Upton, and I don't know, and this is no insult to Kate or anything like that, but her character is really dense. I don't know if she is or if she's just acting like that.
she's a model primarily, so
right,
I
and
think
so
she probably was hired for the looks more than
right,
anything else.
and that's the point of this. I thought once the three of them got together, this thing took on kind of a fun little romp. For the majority of the time is the three of them get together and try to figure out how to get payback and pay some comeuppance to this man who's seeing all three of them. For the vast majority of this film, I thought it was really pretty fun. Somewhat clever. Toward the end of it, I'd say like the last 20, 30 minutes, it gets nasty. The things that they do, and not in any way, shape, or form to condone that he's sleeping around on all of them. But I think a better picture, a smarter picture, would have had them not drop down to his level and do some really nasty, unkind things where I end up not liking them for what they did. That's really my only negative comment. This isn't any great movie. It's not going to get nominated for awards. So going in and knowing what it was about, I thought the vast majority of it was pretty fun. The three of them worked pretty well. Don Johnson is in this. There are other faces you'll recognize that are good. I was just disappointed in the way it ended, and I thought it could have been a little bit more highbrow.
Oh, you were asking for highbrow in comedy these days? Sorry, you need to go backwards in time for
Probably
that.
about 50 years.
Yeah, I didn't like it. It felt like a First Wives Club for premenopausal women, basically.
Okay.
I thought, sometimes the brain just fizzles. Leslie Mann was just annoying from the get-go when you see her in this movie.
Right.
She's just manic and annoying and shrill, and I didn't want to sympathize with her because I didn't want to hear her anymore. And the others were okay. I mean, this is more for the ladies than for the guys, I think. There's a little something extra for Dad in the form of, this is horrible, but people who've watched long enough know I'm a little lowbrow. Kate Upton running on the beach in slow motion was the best part of this movie. And that's in the trailer. Other than that, I just was kind of bored, and I thought, too often it was gross humor, or again, when the revenge plot finally kicks in, it is nasty, and it's not as you said, it's not as madcap as you hoped it would be. I mean, that's really where the meat of this movie should be, and by the time it finally got there, I had lost interest by that point. I was like, okay, sting the guy however you're going to sting him, and let me go home. So I didn't really care for this one at all, and it's so rare that I see comedies I like these days. I mean, I mentioned I brought in one that I got from the library last week because it was the first comedy in like a long time that made me laugh at all. So I would say, if you're like me and you want a little bit more intelligence or class in your comedy, The Other Woman is probably not
That's
one
not
to
where you're going to
pull
go
off
for
the
it.
shelf.
This is true.
So speaking of a little bit more class,
Yes.
we have one more to discuss today. This film is out with all the other ones. Here is a documentary about a woman who was a street photographer in New York, Chicago, in France, all over the world during her life, but never showed anybody her pictures. It wasn't until after she died that her body of work was discovered and then assessed to be a sort of important artist of her time, and nobody knew it, including her. So this documentary investigates her story. It is called Finding Vivian Maier. I really like this a lot.
Now, how'd you get a hold of this? Because this was not through our friends at Video Headquarters, although hopefully they'll get a copy or two.
This is out via IFC Films, MPI Home Video. I get press releases from various companies basically saying, this movie's coming out, and if something looks interesting to me and to you, we request it, and it shows up at my door, and we talk about it. So this is available, wherever DVDs are sold, online, on demand, streaming, all that stuff. I had heard about Vivian Maier online. When her photos were first being shown, there were some websites that had some, sort of to promote the gallery screenings and to tell a bit of this story. So I was aware of the stills and how good they are. So when I heard there was a documentary, I was like, cool, I want to hear the story. And it's a mystery, really. This guy is at an auction, buys a trunk full of negatives, looks at them and says, oh my God, these are good, puts them online, starts getting a lot of attention, then says, I want to get the rest of her negatives, winds up amassing all of her belongings, finds out she passed away a few years earlier, and then wants to find out who this woman was. And she was a pack rat, so it's this amazing bit of investigation through old receipts and at one point he says he knew she lived in Chicago and they didn't use area codes at that point, or she didn't write area codes down, so he went through every area code with the last set of 7 numbers to see if he would find one that would hit. So it's a very cool procedural investigation thing where you learn a bit more about this woman who turned out to be a nanny, so she lived with various families, including Phil Donahue at one point. And through her photos and home movies and the recollections of people she knew, the pieces of the puzzle as to who this woman was come together. And it's interesting, it's ultimately sad and kind of tragic and triumphant at the same time. There's a sequence I was just saying while we were during the clip I really liked. She spent some time in France and took photos of people there. And after 50, 60, God knows how many years, there was a showing of the film photos she had taken there back then. And you see people who are very elderly seeing themselves when they were younger, seeing people who they knew who are no longer with us when they were younger, and it's this real emotional scene. So I thought this was really good. And beyond that, it doesn't wear out its welcome. This is like 83 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's tight, it does its thing, and it moves along. You see a lot of her photography in this. It makes you want to see more of it. In the supplements, they have this photo gallery of some of her photos. There's a small section of some of the home movies she shot around downtown Chicago in like 1970, which is kind of an interesting slice of street life back then. And I would highly recommend this to anybody who's into art or photography, or who likes a good mystery, or who is interested in other people's business,
right.
because it's a little bit of that too.
Sure.
So I really liked it a lot.
One thing that I was worried about, because I knew a little bit because you told me about this when you sent me the email saying, do we want to look at this?
Right.
I was worried that as a film, that Finding Vivian Maier, the film, wouldn't hold up to the subject matter, that the filmmaking process and the way the filmmakers put it together wouldn't be nearly as good. I've seen several documentaries where the subject is just fascinating, and boy, this film wasn't made very well. Not the case with this. You and I were talking beforehand, or I think as the trailer was playing, that the artist who purchased these negatives and essentially is the on-screen persona who does all this investigation, it could very much have been about him. Oh, I did this, I did this, I did this. And he's very much smart enough to respect the art and respect the artist and just step back. He guides us through some of these processes, but I thought it was a very well-made film. In looking at Vivian Maier's work, you're right that we see a lot of her still photographs, which I think 98% of them were Life magazine quality.
Absolutely. I thought the same thing.
Stunningly beautiful, artistic, wonderful compositions, wonderful exposures. It's just marvelous work that she did. We then spend the second half of the film looking at her 8mm and 16mm films. I didn't think the films quite stood up to that quality, because it's much more just family-oriented things, because you say that she was a nanny with a lot of these families. I thought they were interesting. And then to be somewhat pessimistic or negative about this film, as we got further and further along, we find out some less than positive things about the artist, and that's interesting, but then there's not a lot of material of hers to see, and so the filmmakers who are making Finding Vivian Maier, I thought, tried to almost replicate her style in a lot of the photography that we were seeing. Maybe that's me being overly critical of this, but I found it to be a little bit boring. I wanted to see more of her work. It's certainly driving me that one of the first things I'm going to do this week is go to that website and look at some of this marvelous work. So this was by far the favorite thing I saw this week. Just a well-made film about a magnificent artist and photographer. So Finding Vivian Maier was a big surprise, and I think pretty much anybody would like this.
Oh, I think so too.
Yeah.
So that's all we have for
Yep.
this week. Next week, Guardians of the Galaxy
And
in the
probably
theater.
about it. Wouldn't you think?
I don't think they're going to
Who
get
wants to
anything
go
else.
against that?
And I was saying to my pal when we were doing the double yesterday, I am looking forward to Guardians of the Galaxy, but
As am I.
mostly because I want to stop seeing the trailer. Because it's been in front of every
That's
movie I've
possible.
seen for the last 4 months.
I'd be interested to know how many downloads of the songs that have already been on the trailer have occurred on
That's
YouTube.
the good thing.
So
I like the songs
the
they
music's
use.
gonna
So
be
it's
great,
cool
yeah.
to hear that in surround sound.
Yep.
So unless you have any other business.
Not I.
I do. I wanted
Yes,
to say
you
that
wanted to-
very, very quickly. I went to the Somerville Theater in Somerville, Massachusetts, more or less Boston, and I saw a Don Knotts double feature last weekend. They're doing this affordable family film series where all shows are $3. So I saw Incredible Mr. Limpet and Ghost and Mr. Chicken on a giant screen. Perfect prints. The Chicken was a 2002 print, so it had looked like a new movie. And Mr. Chicken was an original IB Technicolor print from 1964 from the studio that has almost never been played. So these movies looked exactly like they did back in 63, 64 when they came out. Good-sized audience from toddlers to old folks,
Right.
laughing uproariously at the antics of bug-eyed Don Knotts. It was beautiful, and all that cost me $3.
Not bad.
So I just, hats off to theaters that do stuff like this anymore, because they're making people happy, and they're doing the Lord's work. Like Noah. So, until
There we go.
then.
Until then, I guess.
I'm Mark.
I'm Tom.
And we are
The
Cinemaniacs.
Cinemaniacs. Bye.